Mike Hailwood died in 1981, at the age of 40. There was no farewell interview, no final statement, no list of rivals. What remains are the things racers leave behind on purpose, their words, their races, and how others remember them. During the 1960s and 1970s, Mike Hailwood was known as a rider who raced by instinct. He didn't talk about strategy. He didn't believe in politics. He trusted throttle, brakes, and feel. Journalists wrote that Hailwood rode motorcycles the way others breathed, natural, effortless, uncontrolled. And that was exactly what caused trouble. Hailwood didn't like being managed. He didn't like team orders. He didn't like being told how to ride or how to behave. Those comments were printed. Those attitudes were noticed. Other riders talked about it openly. He wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter. But he refused to bend. That refusal put him in conflict with powerful teams, internal rivals, and constant comparisons to legends of the past. Not once, but again and again. So, when this film talks about hatred, it doesn't mean personal anger. It means racing conflict. The kind that happens when talent meets control, when instinct collides with authority, when a rider chooses freedom, knowing it will cost him. These are not guesses. They are moments recorded in interviews, race reports, and paddock memories, long before Mike Hailwood's life ended. And when those moments are lined up, three names keep returning. The rivalry between Mike Hailwood and Giacomo Agostini was not built on crashes. It was built on proximity. In the late 1960s, both men raced wheel-to-wheel at extreme speed, on circuits where mistakes were fatal and safety margins barely existed. There were no dramatic collisions between them, because neither could afford one. Agostini raced with the full strength of MV Agusta behind him. He protected championships. He managed risks. His riding reflected the logic of an empire, built to dominate over an entire season. Hailwood refused to play that game. On road circuits and places like the Isle of Man TT, Hailwood repeatedly pushed beyond the pace that logic and machinery suggested was safe. He attacked races individually, even when Agostini was riding conservatively for points. That difference created constant tension. When Agostini stayed smooth and controlled, Hailwood increased the speed. When MV Agusta's strategy slowed the race, Hailwood broke it open. Journalists noticed immediately. They didn't write about collisions. They wrote about pressure, and about what that pressure represented. When Hailwood won, newspapers framed it as man defeating machine. They wrote that instinct, courage, and feel had overcome factory power. It was celebrated as proof that a rider could still matter more than the system behind him. But when Agostini won, the narrative shifted. The press emphasized inevitability. They reinforced the belief that organization, resources, and machinery would always prevail in the long run. Race after race, the same story repeated. This rivalry wasn't about contact. It was about forcing the other man to race in a way he didn't want to. And that is where the conflict truly lived. If Giacomo Agostini represented an empire, Phil Red represented something closer and far more uncomfortable. He was British, he was fast, and he was inside the same garages. During the 1967-1968 seasons, Hailwood and Red found themselves locked in direct competition, particularly in the 200cc and 500cc classes. This was not a distant rivalry measured in headlines. It was daily tension, seen in practice, felt in debriefs, and noticed by everyone in the paddock. Reports from the time described garages split in silence. Two riders sharing space, but not words. Phil Red raced with calculation and ambition. He wanted titles. He wanted recognition. And he was willing to play the political game inside teams to get it. Hailwood hated that. Not because Red was slow, but because he was deliberate. Journalists noted that when both men were competitive in the same class, The atmosphere changed. Every lap became a message. Every overtake felt personal. Years later, Phil Red himself admitted the truth, saying they did not speak during that period and that the rivalry was not friendly. The press went further, describing it as a civil war inside the garage. This was not about man versus machine. It was man versus man. Hailwood didn't enjoy racing someone who turned competition into strategy off the bike. Reed didn't enjoy racing someone who refused to engage in that game. Each forced the other into an uncomfortable role. That is why this rivalry cut deeper than most. Because when racing becomes personal, there is nowhere to hide. Not on the track and not in the garage. John Surtees was never a rival Mike Hailwood could line up against. He was a shadow. Before Hailwood became a world champion, Surtees had already defined what greatness looked like for a British rider. Multiple motorcycle world titles. Then the impossible, winning the Formula One World Championship. By the time Hailwood dominated Grand Prix racing, Surtees had already left the category. But the comparison never left Hailwood. The British press made sure of that. Race reports and editorials constantly asked the same question. Is Hailwood as great as Surtees? Could he ever surpass him? That question followed Hailwood everywhere. When he won, it wasn't enough. The victory was weighed against a legacy he didn't choose. When he lost, the comparison became unforgiving. Journalists described Hailwood as a natural genius, smoother, more instinctive than Surtees. But Surtees was labeled complete, the rider who mastered everything. That contrast mattered, because it forced Hailwood into a role he never wanted. He wasn't allowed to be himself. He was asked to replace a legend. Hailwood never publicly attacked Surtees. He respected him deeply, but those who knew him recalled his frustration with constant comparison. This was a rivalry without contact, without confrontation, but full of pressure. You can race opponents. You can beat machines. But you cannot overtake history. And for Mike Hailwood, that was one contest he never asked to enter. In the end, Mike Hailwood never sat down to explain himself. There was no confession, no final list, no attempt to rewrite his own story. What remains is simpler and stronger. The conflicts that shaped his career were visible long before he died. They were written into race reports, paddock conversations, and the way the sport talked about him. Giacomo Agostini represented the power of machines and empires. Phil Red turned competition into something personal inside the same garage. John Surtees became the shadow history refused to release. Each conflict forced Hailwood to answer the same question in different ways. Do you adapt, or do you stay yourself? Hailwood chose the harder option. He refused to surrender instinct to systems. He refused to play politics for titles. He refused to become a replacement for someone else's legend. That choice cost him control. It cost him safety, but it gave the sport something rare. A rider who proved that genius didn't need permission. When Hailwood died in 1981, the headlines didn't speak about hatred. They spoke about talent, courage, and a man who raced the way he believed was right. That is why this story matters. Because Mike Hailwood didn't leave behind explanations. He left behind evidence, on the track, in the press, and in the memory of racing itself.